Hello everybody. Welcome to the fourth session of the policy strand. We're here with Heather Toney, I'm sorry, Heather Toney. She served as the first African-American, first female, and the youngest mayor of Greenville, Mississippi. She was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve as regional administrator for the EPA. And she now leads the Moms Clean Air Force field team and has been leading it for about 2 years and has worked on local government policy initiatives and the Moms and Mayors program. She holds a bachelor's degree from Spelman College in Atlanta and a law degree from Tulane School of Law. So welcome Heather Toney. If you would like to get started, I'll be here. We're going to answer questions as they come in. So if you guys have any questions, just feel free to use the Q&A.
So much. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming on and joining and having this conversation around climate and climate policy. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I am Heather McTeer Toney. I am coming to you from the ancestral land of the Choctaw and Chickasaw Native Americans in what we now know as the state of Mississippi. I'm in Oxford, Mississippi. I am a Mississippi Delta native, and I have had a lot of titles throughout my life. My current title is I serve as Vice President for Community Engagement at the Environmental Defense Fund. We work right alongside good friends at Moms, so it was really cool to come over from Moms Clean Air Force to EDF and work where I love to do passionate work around climate and environmental justice, policy, and community engagement. But my favorite titles are Mom and Hun. I'm married, I have children, and one of my children is in high school. So I feel like I am at least a little bit talking to folks that I talk to on a regular basis and get to jump into climate and climate policy. I'm going to share a few slides with you all today, but please do not hesitate to jump in with questions because this is a really big issue. It's tough, it's evolving, and it is crazy even for folks like me who try to untangle the knot of climate change and climate policy. But I'll start with you with something that's one of my favorites. I don't know how many of you all have seen the movie Dune. I am a really big science fiction fan, and I watched Dune a long time ago, like back in the 80s when it first came out and it was cult fan fiction. The movie was. But if you've ever seen the movie, or I hope you do get a chance to go and see the movie, it's a really interesting take on climate and climate policy and climate change from a science fiction perspective. And let me lay it out for you. You've got a planet that has a huge, tremendous natural resource that the rest of the galaxy needs to use called spice. But the spice really is protected by indigenous people who live on this planet. And in fact, they are so good at protecting this natural resource that the rest of the galaxy truly has no idea of the capacity or the lengths to which they'll go to protect that natural resource. What they look at as being a planet that is desert, has no water, things that we need for life. The people who are indigenous to that community and to that planet not only know where to find it, but know how to protect it. That's the essence of climate policy from a state, local, and a federal perspective. And we're going to dig into it a little bit right now today. I'm going to show you some stats, some facts, and then let's jump right in and ask questions. Now, you have a chat function, so please put your questions into the chat function or raise your hand. Don't hesitate to interrupt me if you have any questions, because the way that you learn this and the way that you really deeply engage in it is to ask the questions, look at the hard things or things that don't appear to make a lot of sense, question it, and then talk about it anymore. So I'm going to share my screen now. Oh, it says, I think somebody may need to enable participant screen sharing for me. So while that is taking place, I hope someone can do that. Okay, so we're going to work on that and wait just a second for that. Let's see here. I see the little spinning wheel. Let's see if we got it. Nope, not yet. So we may have to wait a second while we are going to see if we can get screen share. In the meantime, I'm just going to start telling you and sharing with you some of the things that we're finding on climate and energy policy. So you would be interested to know that actually most people right now do think that climate and energy policy is one of the most important things that we need to talk about in the United States. But the question becomes, what is it? What does policy mean? Hold on just a second. I think it's saying that I can now share. Yay. Okay, great. Okay, hold on just a second here. All right. I think we're almost there. Can everyone see my screen? Which screen are you looking at?
We can see it.
You can see the one that says policy and climate action?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so this is clearly what we're discussing today, climate and policy action. And I put down my handles because social media is a powerful tool. So you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, anything else. Those are my social media handles. And I encourage you to use social media to talk about this, to talk about where you are, what you're thinking, because that's one of the most influential factors of policy, how we direct policy. Policy is the rules and regulation that control how we make decisions around climate, the same way that policy exists around other social issue factors. So there's policy around education, policy around healthcare, policy around climate functions in the same way. So use those social media handles, because I promise you, the more that you share and talk about these issues, the more influence you have on climate policy, even if you're not of voting age right now. I know we may have some people who are joining us that aren't 18 yet, but you can still be an influential factor on climate policy if it's something that's important to you. So I'm going to give you a bit of homework at the end. Sorry about it, but trust me, you're going to enjoy what I'm asking you to do. And I'm really hopeful that you tag me. Give me some points with my kids. Okay, so where do Americans stand on energy and climate? This is really important. This is a piece that was done by EPIC, which is the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago. And what they did was they looked at where Americans actually are thinking, what is it that we're actually really thinking about climate change, climate policy? Does it relate to what maybe we see on television, what we hear on the news, but also what's in our media, what comes across our social media feeds, and what we talk about when we're going to lunch or grabbing a pizza or going to the movies. So what they found is really, regardless of what your affiliation is, the majority of Americans really do view climate change as a very important issue, and that has increased over the past 3 years. In addition, around half of Americans right now do support clean electricity standards. So if you watch the Super Bowl this past weekend, or if your parents are like my age and we were really watching the halftime show of the Super Bowl, you probably saw a whole lot of commercials around electrification of vehicles, EV chargers, different things that have to do with clean energy. You saw celebrities that are really pushing clean energy. You even saw some new technology that came out around EV and EV infrastructure. Well, it's supported by the fact that when you look and talk to people every single day, that's really something that's supporting and that Americans want to see is clean energy standards that are taking place, as well as making polluters pay for the pollution that they're putting out right now. So dirty energy, people want to see the polluters pay for it, and we want to see more clean energy. This boils down to what we experience in our communities every single day. If you live in and around polluting facilities, you see air quality that's not good, or let's say you have asthma and you have to understand or know what the air quality is before you go out to track practice, soccer practice, or even when you're in the bus line, when you're getting dropped off or picked up from school, the air quality that you are breathing in impacts how you perform, how you think, whether or not you got a headache going to first period or not. So these are things where Americans feel that they're important, they're willing to pay for it, and that they are an indicator of climate change. What's even more exciting is that we actually really believe in the science on this. So more than half of Americans, and particularly more over the past 5 years, really see and are trusting the science behind it. We're relying on what is coming out of data, the studies, because we feel it. So when you can smell, see, hear, taste, using your physical senses, and that in your brain connects with the science and data that's coming out around climate change and air pollution, it begins to make you think differently. It also causes us to take actions. So these actions that we're taking to address climate change means that you're paying attention when you're driving down the street and you see black smoke come out of the back of a car, and it causes you to think about, I don't know if I want to get a car that's EV, or maybe, I want to make sure that the vehicle, if I decide to drive a vehicle, is going to be a clean vehicle. It makes you and causes you to think about supply chain, like where your coffee cup might be coming from. If you get a coffee cup, or if you get a plastic bottle, is that contributing or taking away from the clean energy that you want to experience? So it creates this space where you're buying clean energy, connected products, but also you're looking long-term into how we have our personal impacts into what's happening on in and around climate. So believe it or not, we actually, the majority of us want to see clean energy take place.
So you had a question come in. It says, I'm trying to buy an electric car and having a hard time. There are ads, but no cars. The Bolt isn't built now. Hyundai doesn't sell their electric cars in Michigan. It's really frustrating. So what to do? I want the car. I have the cash. There are tax breaks, but no cars.
That is a tremendous issue that is happening all around the country right now, because it is happening with EV, it is happening with gas-powered cars. There is a serious supply chain problem that's taking place globally that is impacting a number of these spaces. And so the bad news is, I can't tell you that that's going to be resolved anytime soon, because of the supply chain and access points that have taken place over the past couple of months as a result of COVID, and where we're seeing people having funds to pay for things, but don't have the supplies. We don't have the supplies coming in fast enough. The good news is there's such a desire for that. The good news is that we're working continually on policy that creates a space to make buying cars, EV cars, more affordable and more efficient. So even if you have the cash in hand now, you're in a really good position to look at not only purchasing that vehicle, but seeing the vehicle do something that vehicles never do. That's increase in value. So I would say hold your horses. Don't get too excited because you don't see any. It's okay. Keep watching. They're building, they're coming. And the more and more we see announcements about EV battery manufacturing, policies that are going into place that allows the building of these factories, the transference of materials that help us to reduce the time on the supply chain, they're coming. You're actually in a better spot than most others. All right. I'm going to go really quickly to the willingness to pay, because that's another issue that often is talked about. And this is not the best slide, it's not clear, so I'll try my best to send it along afterwards so you can have a clear slide. But what this does is it talks about the fact that, we actually are willing to have a sense of altruism with one another, meaning that just because it's not clean energy or I don't live in a polluted community doesn't mean that I don't want to see clean communities take place in other parts of the country. And that makes sense. If I live in a space that does not have environmental justice issues or just issues of injustice around clean air, clean water, and clean land, That doesn't mean I'm not going to visit a place that doesn't mean I might not work in a place that doesn't mean that I want to make sure that when I am thinking through friends, neighbors, family, the expansion of my community, those places don't have that same access. So that sense of altruism actually does exist in the United States, probably more than we let on. 53% of Americans really do want to see the cleaning up of power plants. They really do want to see environmental injustices corrected, want to know that people have access to clean water, clean land, clean air. And again, it makes sense. When you leave high school, you go to college, and let's say you're going to play for your play sports and you want to make sure that your team is at the top of the game. When you leave high school and go to that college, if you're playing in an area that has environmental justice issues, that impacts your performance. Nobody wants that unfair impact to their performance. So there are a lot of different streams and places where we're saying it's more important for us to look to how we can get to equity, and we're willing to pay for that, versus to say, oh no, the people over on that side of town can deal with it themselves. We do have in this country a history of issues around systemic racism and issues around policy that we are working desperately hard to correct. And it's going to take continued advocacy from all aspects of different issues, including climate change, to help us to get to that point. But I love the fact that looking at these slides it shows us, and some of this policy research shows us, that we're on our way there. And as high school students and students who are getting ready to go to college, it is so important that you know that, and that you know your input and engagement helps us to move that needle just a little bit further. This is Manchester neighborhood in Houston, Texas. It is one of the most heavily polluted communities in the United States of America. And what you're looking at is a picture that I took when I was in Houston doing some work with moms, working on environmental injustices. We have a group called Eco Madres, which works with Latina moms and abuelas and tias and communities of color that don't always have a large say in climate and environmental policy. And I was in the neighborhood and I could not believe that there were houses, and this is just one, that are literally connected. That house, I don't know if you can see my little arrow here. It is attached. It is attached to a facility. And this is what we mean by fence line and frontline communities. Fence line communities sit on a proverbial, if you see right here where this truck is, fence. They sit on the fence to climate and environmental pollution. This is very real. Frontline communities do the same thing, but they serve like on the front lines of climate change, of extreme weather. So these are the first communities that when there's a tornado or a hurricane that comes through, the first place that they hit are what we call frontline communities. If you were in a war, the front line takes the brunt of the force. And while they are taking the brunt of the force, everyone behind them is getting prepared. But it's also the front lines that get sacrificed. It's the fence line communities that are dealing right there with the polluted sources and are figuring out how to do it. Now, I love this picture. And the reason I love this picture so much is because not only is it a stark reminder of just how closely people live to pollution. If you look at that front yard and see what I see, when I grew up coming up in the Mississippi Delta, I see plants. I see somebody's grandmama who decided that even regardless of where she was going to live, she was going to put her plants out in the front yard. She was going to make sure that she had her flowers. The front is full of greenery, and that speaks to the resiliency of people who are committed to not only surviving, but figuring out how to thrive, figuring out how do we reduce the pollution in the communities that are impacted the most, and do it with a sense of tenacity that says we are going to survive this problem. The mothers that I talked to in Manchester and Houston, 3 out of 4 of one of their children, I was going to a baseball game out there. She said 3 out of 4 of her kids had asthma. They live in the communities where every single day they are relying on policies that are created to help not only protect their children from the impacts of climate change, the extreme weather, but also environmental injustices like air pollution, like having to live right next to facilities where there's no permitting that says there should be a setback or distance from which they live in these spaces. So it's important to keep these reminders up front that we're not talking about issues that possibly could be somewhere. No, this is real life. This is every day. And this is people's lived experience. This was a cartoon that came up at COP27. I was in Glasgow at COP27 last year, and it epitomizes where we are talking about climate policy and why you have to be engaged. Is in today's discussion, who eats what risk? And the person, see, this lady who's in the middle, clearly the moderator, well, I see everyone came in this meeting really ready to sit down and talk. And despite the water hoses, the cannons, all out war that we usually see every single day when it comes to climate and people being very divisive around this issue, it's not what you saw on the first slides that I shared. Because the majority of us really do want to see strong climate policies that are protective of our planet, that ensure we have a livable, breathable resources that we can rely on, and that we are in a position to have economic development, job creation, moving us into the future. That's not what we always see. And who eats that risk, who sacrifices themselves, is often what we are fighting about. This is a photo that I took outside a COP. So I went to the UN Climate Conference. I had a delegate badge. I don't think it was, wasn't a delegate. I forgot what the badge was called, but I went inside. I was working because I work for the Environmental Defense Fund. We have tremendous work going on around methane and the reduction of methane. I was hosting a panel on reducing methane and environmental justice communities. What's the policy around that? How can we connect the data and the science to tools that communities need to really help them to deploy into their spaces solutions that work? But just like it's important to put on my high heels and suit and dress and go inside to the meeting, it's equally important to be outside and to see what is happening with the protesters, to understand deeply what is the concern and why this is such an important moment for all of us to look at what's happening around climate and environmental policy. And so at the UN Climate Conference, it's sort of where the whole world comes together, and we are looking at what the solutions are, who's supposed to do what, who's carrying and putting a lot of the pollution in versus who is doing what they're supposed to do to make sure that we're reducing pollution together. And on this particular night, this was a protest that was taking place by Extinction Rebellion. So I took my badges off, went outside so I could be a part of this protest as well. And 2 things I noticed. Number one, there were more police there that night than any of the other nights of the UN Climate Conference. And I mean, seriously, there were buses of police that were surrounding young people that were peacefully protesting. And part of me was looking out into the crowd like, I have an obligation to not only be here and a part of this, but as a parent, I know that these are students, these are young people, and they're standing up for what they believe in. I have a job of protection. So I was out there. I took pictures of the police line, as you can probably see. If you go on my TikTok, you'll see I got pictures from all different angles because I want to be sure to document. All of my attorney training and mama-isms kicked in because I saw young people that were out there standing on the front lines. And I know that's what my passion is. But this was such a great picture to me of showing not only peaceful protests, but students standing up for right policy. And it's so important that that has to be inside as well as outside of these conversations. The voice that you bring to what you want to see happen around climate action is critical to shifting change. Because if it's only outside and doesn't get inside, then there's no way to have real conversation of what the change should be. But when we have it in both places, where people who are a part of the conversation are in effect removing this fence that you see between us, because that's the security fence between inside and outside, security versus non-security, COVID versus not COVID. Sometimes you have to just step on the other side to help remove the barriers. And that's so important to changing and shifting climate policy in the direction that is protective of us.
So,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
So you got another question in the chat. It says, is there a way to push climate policy without politicizing it? I feel like climate policy, at least in the US, is pushed in one party's political agenda, and it ends up being a value for only one party, when really it is in the best benefit for all people, no matter their political party. Is there a way to take climate policy out of the political narrative and just be a societal concern?
I think this epitomizes this next slide, right? Which is a picture that I took of a Buddhist monk that was meditating in the midst of all of this, in the midst of everything that was going on. This was his presence, to both love and grieve for Earth, and to ensure that we are truly, truly keeping the main thing, the main thing. And so to answer your question, we will not get rid of politics. What we do is begin to normalize this conversation around climate impacts and climate policy in every aspect of our life. And normalizing this conversation helps us to see it as a part of our everyday going about what we do. We think of climate change as one of the buckets of issues, right? You have education, healthcare, jobs, climate change. You know, I'm just naming a few. So you see it as one of these little buckets, and the buckets get really political because they have views on what is one political party's view on an issue versus another around healthcare or around jobs, and it begins to get really divisive. Climate change is different. Climate and environmental policy is really like the table that all the boxes sit on, because climate and environment are directly connected to what happens in any of those spaces. Real simply, because we all are on one planet. It's not like we're all going to be able to get on a nice little rocket and go up to space and live on the moon. I just saw moon rising last week, y'all. So no, we're not going to be able to go and then go into a hole on the moon and create this whole new universe and community where we're all going to live in some kind of amazingly altruistic ecosystem. Like, that's not reality. We're on one space, one planet. And so we have to understand that what happens with this planet directly impacts every other social justice issue. And continuing to have that conversation and normalizing it is what begins to break it out of the political spaces, such that it's becoming a part of our everyday conversation and everyday actions. Now, there has to be some work done, and I say homework done, so that we understand each other's lived experiences here. If you've never dealt with inequity, then it's a little difficult to really understand and embrace why people are so worked up around inequity. When we do a better job of understanding the lived experiences of people, then that's a better indicator as to why we're pushing, or groups are pushing for a particular resolution to a social problem. So I'll give you an example. And this one is actually could be considered a pretty divisive example. There's a connection between climate change and police brutality. Why do you say that, Ms. Toney? Well, because if we look at what the data and science tells us, it tells us that as the weather, the extreme weather and increases, the planet gets hotter. And for years, there have been connections between heat and violence. And when we add to that, the fact that there have been heat islands created in the United States, urban areas where we don't have green spaces, where there are concrete buildings, projects that have been intentionally placed in Black and Brown communities around the country, that in addition to the way that we have policing historically in this country, you can see a clear connection between the fact that if it gets hotter, there's going to be a higher level of violence, and that is accompanied around racial discord. We see that in the United States today. And that has become a very political issue, even though it is deeply steeped in science. Even though in other countries, we can see the same things around when and how wars are started, what the temperature is, how it's increased as the planet has warmed. And so reducing global emissions and reducing extreme heat and reducing these things are actually a peace tactic. These are spaces where we have to have very innovative conversations, but also need the forethought of young people to connect these dots for us. And that's why having this conversation with high school students is so important, is because you're one of the bases to begin to normalize this conversation in everything. You're on the cusp of all of these new, different, and innovative careers like climate psychology. When I was in school, there was no such thing as climate psychology. Like, that made absolutely no sense. And I'm pretty sure that my professors would have thought I had lost my mind for putting those things together. But realistically, yeah, climate psychology is a thing. How are we programming ourselves to think and feel as climate is shifting and changing? And again, going back to the very base facts that we know from the International Panel on Climate Change, that's IPCC, that is a collection of the world's greatest climate scientists that look and monitor this data every single year, and they come together and they give us reports. So the report that was released last year, right before the UN Climate Conference, said that we are in a space now where there's some extreme weather impacts that are going to happen. And we can't avoid that. If anyone has heard or talked about like the difference between 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, like what's the difference? If we get to 2 degrees Celsius, we're all gonna die. Like you've heard and seen the really stringent climate, we have to do something. I'm not sure how many of you all have seen the movie Don't Look Up, but that's like an example of like, we've got to do something right now. Okay, IPCC is that group that makes those decisions. But think of it like this. The human body has a temperature that's set, I think it's like 98.7, don't quote me on this, I'm not a scientist. But you know that when you get a fever, it means that your body temperature is getting hotter. And usually when it gets to about 100 degrees, 101, your mom is taking you to the hospital. Like you can take Tylenol when it gets to 99. You know, they tell you to get some ibuprofen to bring your temperature back down. But once it hits a certain level, it's like, nope, body functions start to shut down. You're going to the hospital so we can get your temperature down. Same thing with the planet. Once the planet gets to a certain temperature, we have serious problems. And IPCC has told us that we're already in a space where we're going to have some problems. Equity and climate policy assures that all of those problems don't hit one particular group or one particular people. So that's why it's so important to talk about climate policy, equity, to make sure that we're all sharing this burden so that it does not impact us or impact and sacrifice one particular group of people. I think 2 more questions, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share with you just this last slide. that basically says, you have the data, right? You all, I know, are young people who are on the cusp of doing this work. And again, it thrills me that you're in this space. I wore my T-shirt today for Rise St. James for a particular reason. I got this T-shirt when I was at Climate Conference from a young climate leader. Her name is Shemaya Levine. She lives in St. James, Louisiana, St. James Parish, where I know her mother. Her mother has been a significant environmental justice leader for years. And Shemaya is really third generation of doing this. And Shemaya was at the UN Climate Conference, and she gave me this shirt. And she was like, I want you to have this. I want you to wear this so people know that, you know, St. James Parish, we're out here working, we're out here doing things and making a difference. St. James Parish is a community in South Louisiana that not only fought a petrochemical company, a plastics company coming into their community, they were able to get it reversed. They were able to basically stop it. I had gone down to do some work there, and I will never forget Shemaya's mom saying, Heather, y'all go door to door and just tell people that if we have a hurricane, we're gonna meet at Rose's Catering instead of out on the site. And I was thinking, Ms. Levine, we're gonna meet in the middle of a hurricane? And that never crossed her mind. It was like, we're going to get this done. I wore this shirt today because to me, it embodies the resiliency of people who are retired school teachers, who are church deacons, who are janitors, who stood up in the face of a corporate giant and basically said, not in our home. And for her to be in Glasgow, Scotland, saying and sharing that story, but also being an advocate at her young age, just made me know that there's a reason to keep hoping that we're going to have strong climate policy. So you have the data. You just need to do what you need to do with it. Okay, and with that, I can go to the other questions. I see them in the chat, and we have a few minutes left for questions. Is there either one you want me to take first?
First, can I ask, can you put Shemaya's name in the chat?
Absolutely.
And then I guess segueing to that, how do you get inside of like COP in the whole United Nations conference? And then how do you get the most out of college to prepare to enter those types of careers?
So going to COP is a delegate process, which actually is starting now. So I would encourage you, and I'll put this in the chat, you know, and climate conference, COP 27, look that up. It is in Egypt this year. And so it will be a COP that's taking place in Africa. I'm really excited about the fact that not only will issues of Indigenous communities be at the forefront, also issues around water, access to water, immigration. These will be things that are on the forefront. And so look that up. You get into COP through a delegate process. You quite frankly, you apply. That's not going to be the end all be all to get in, because it's a pretty strenuous process where you're affiliated with a group or organization, a nonprofit. A number of the nonprofit organizations that particularly are youth focused do get passes that end up for their leadership, but that does not mean that you can't go, because there are what are inside COP events, then there are also side COP events that have a lot of the action. It's where there's a lot of engagement and talking about solutions and best practices, and you want to be in those spaces. And then there are a lot of groups that will sponsor students to go. So just keep your eye out for what's happening, be engaged. And again, the more you talk about it, the more that you're in the space to be a part of it. Youth climate activists have a tremendous voice. There's an entire day for youth climate activists at COP. Last year, I remember on one of those days, it was not just main stage, it was throughout the entire conference. So everywhere I turned around and looked, I was running into experts that were talking about the innovative ways they were not only creating, I'd say, green technology in their spaces, but real stories of young people who lived in places where climate change had already happened, and their communities had been overrun. I mean, they were what we call climate refugees, having to move because their community no longer existed. And to hear those stories on the front, I think it is just profound in how often we think about climate policy. How do you get the attention of policymakers to? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't answer the other part of that question, which was college careers. Whatever it is you enjoy doing, start there. And I am so serious about that. Climate TikTok is a thing. Who knew? There are people who are making tremendous amounts of money, but also who are educating leaders on how to talk to different generations around climate issues and connecting the dots between what's important to your generation and how we solve the problem. So start with the thing that you enjoy and add climate to it. If it is finance, then think climate banking. There are conversations right now at the SEC around climate risk disclosures. So even if you want to go into banking and finance, there's a sector on climate for that. If you wanted to go into education, talking about education, how we teach climate and science and data, but also I think I mentioned climate psychology, climate sociology, the movement of people as a response to climate action. That's an area that you can go into. Environmental justice, climate justice, legal. There's basically no area that you can identify that doesn't have a climate lens. So start with what you like. If it's cooking, you need to reduce methane and reduce the amount of meat that we're eating. I would say this, like my favorite thing that has come out now is what I call like the seaweed diet for cows, because scientists came up with a way that we can reduce the amount of gas inside of a cow's stomach so that they don't expel as much methane. This is very important because cattle put out a lot of methane, basically passing gas, and that is harming the planet. I like meat. I know we're supposed to go vegan, and that is one of the avenues that we need to take. I'm trying to do my best to reduce my meat intake. I'm Southern. I like bacon. I don't know that I'm going to completely be vegan at any point, but I'm trying to do better. But the idea that like somebody was so innovative to basically come up with gas X for cows so that I can continue to enjoy a hamburger. These are the things that break down the political walls, right? And we need that continued technology and thought that comes from young people. Yeah, help me. That's help me. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So the next question, which it will probably be our last question, we have about 4 minutes left, I think. So it says, how do you get the attention of policymakers to create policy in a meaningful way?
You keep talking. You keep talking. My dad is retired. He and my mom are retired leaders, but he started out as a civil rights advocate coming to Mississippi. And one of the things that I remember him talking about so often was how people are needed in so many different spaces and aspects of the work. You have people who are lawyers who are on the front lines, but you also need people who are making money to pay legal bills to get people out of jail after they protest. You need people who are at home babysitting and watching kids. You need people who are on social media spreading the message. You need people who are making lunch, because protesting is exhausting and it makes you hungry. So there are so many different places where you can insert yourself that we have to keep doing them together. And we have to keep the momentum up, because that's what gets the attention. So I said I was going to give you some things for homework, and here's what I'm giving you. Number one, go Google environmental justice and climate justice, even if you know what it is. And the reason I say go and Google it is because it creates a continual and increase in the algorithm of people looking and searching for these terms to understand that. And that has, believe it or not, reverberations throughout the business industry and even to policymakers. So something as simple as Googling what is environmental justice, who are these people and leaders, add to the algorithm that get the attention of people who are making the policy. Google it. Number two, get on and use your social media channels, create a climate TikTok, tag me please on Instagram or somewhere. And I'm not the best. I don't know how to do all this stuff. I am still like deeply, deeply learning, but have the conversations on Twitter where you have all the media, the news media, they're following and they're looking at these things. The policymakers are. It makes a difference when you tag a senator or a member of Congress or a policymaker in some shape, form, or fashion. It may not seem like a lot, but it really is, because that is the way that innovation and our technology is working now. There have been tremendous strides that have been made because of what's happened with COVID and us being at home. Young people, quite frankly, have shown us how to communicate. And so that is something that garners the attention. You would not believe how many actions take place because of what they see trending. So make climate a trend. Make the fact that you're having a high school climate consortium, trend that, right? Connect to every person, whether you like them or don't like them, or they like you or don't like you, or you're on two sides of a political aisle. It doesn't matter. Make it a neutral issue that is trending. Tag your favorite celebrities. That's your homework. Be visible. Encourage people to vote. Doesn't matter. This is not about being partisan political. It's about engaging and understanding that you too are a part of the process and being seen. So when people try to ignore you or climate as something that is invisible, make yourself visible and make yourself seen. And that's how you get the attention.
That's great. Do we have any other questions?
So if there are no other questions, I will end with this, but I appreciate you all so much for inviting me. Look at Rise St. James, and we'll put that in here. Google environmental justice. And as some of you all are juniors and seniors, start looking at internships in environmental justice groups and green groups. If you don't see something that looks like what you're looking for, tell them to create it. There's nothing wrong with going to a group and saying, you know what, you need an environmental advocate intern at this company, and I'm the person for you. Ask to be paid. It's okay to ask to be paid, because internships, while it is important to get volunteer experience, and you absolutely should get volunteer experience, you need the opportunities to go and do what we call sitting at the feet of the elders and listening deeply. But you need to also look for the paid interns and ask to be paid as an intern, even a nominal fee. It makes a difference because it shows your value and it shows that you know what your value is. So don't be afraid to ask for a few dollars for your internship.
Thank you so much for presenting to us. I know I've gotten a lot from this presentation. I hope others have as well. At 3 o'clock, we will be starting our closing remarks. I'll put the link for that in the chat. But thank you so much for this. This was very helpful.
Thank you all. I'm so glad you invited me. And hey, I can't wait to be alongside you as you guys are changing the world. I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much.